We have brother Farhan, originally from Pakistan. Welcome.
Thank you.
First of all, can you give me your name, your background?
Oh, sure. My name is Farhan Quraishi. My background is Pakistani. I was born and raised in the state of Maryland to a Pakistani family that practices a particular form of Islam,
Which was?
which was Ahmadiyya, and they are not considered Muslim by the mainstream Muslim community. And so when I was 17 years old, I left the Ahmadiyya community and I converted to Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, which is the mainstream orthodoxy.
Why you left Ahmadiyya?
The main reason was I believe that I had spiritual experiences in the masjid, um, as well as the belief that we are to follow, practice, interpret Islam as the first three generations of Muslims understood, practiced, and
So
interpreted
for how
Islam.
many years you went to an Ahmadiyya mosque and you did the prayers? For how many years?
Oh, my whole life up until I was 16 or 17 years old.
And so did your parents?
Yes.
And what was the name of the mosque, the Ahmadi mosque?
Beitur Rahman in Silver Spring, Maryland. My grandfather was a missionary, a muballigh or an imam for the Ahmadiyya. He spent 20 years propagating his faith in Africa, Senegal and the Ivory Coast to be specific. And so my family was a very religious family in terms of their Ahmadiyya upbringing. And so when I left Ahmadiyya for Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, which is mainstream Islam or Sunni Islam, it was quite devastating for them to see that.
Did they reject you or just like hard times?
It was close to rejection in terms of kicking me out. The thing is, I was underage, and so they couldn't legally do it. But it was to the point of certain threats of abandonment, and you're not a part of the family. You're worse than a cockroach. They wouldn't let me go to the Sunni masjid. They would take my keys away, and things of that nature. That was more so in the beginning. Tears, a lot of tears from my parents, which was hard to see. So it was a hard transition from one.
So it was painful for all of you.
All of us, the whole family, not just our immediate family, but the extended family as well.
Why you decided to leave the Ahmadi faith? I mean, since it's considered like a branch of Islam anyway, some people do. At least the Ahmadi consider themselves
Muslim,
Muslims.
Right.
So why you went through all that just to stay within Islam? Like,
Well, I was attracted to the core culture that Islam was brought up in. The culture of 7th century Arabia. That when I went to the masjid and I heard the recitation of the Quran and the call of the adhan, that was appealing, attractive to me.
didn't you have that on Ahmadi Masjid?
It wasn't as powerful and beautiful as it was expressed in the mainstream community.
Okay.
The Arabic, what pronunciation was lacking, the discipline was lacking. You had a very Pakistani culture in the Ahmadiyya community.
How many Ahmadis in the United States? Do you have an estimate?
About 10,000.
10,000?
Yeah.
They have mosques. How many mosques do you think?
I would say about like a little bit more than a dozen mosques, and mission houses.
So they have quite a good presence in United States.
I would say they have a decent presence, yeah.
And so there were doctrinal issues as well that made you make your transition from one branch to another.
Well, Ahmadiyya, they believe that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad was the Masih Maud, which means promised Messiah. Believe that he was the Imam Mahdi, that he was the second coming of Jesus. So these were theological issues that I started to disagree with. I started to believe that the Quran and the Hadith teach that Prophet Muhammad ibn Abdullah was the last and final messenger. The ayah in the Quran is Khatam al-Nabiyyin.
Right.
And so based on these doctrinal issues, I gravitated towards Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Yeah.
So, okay, at 17 you became Salafi, let's say. And then what happened? Did you become more radical, more like deep? You went deep into Islam. You started like doing the rituals according to the Salafi movement and your appearances as well. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Oh, sure. I definitely started to dress different. The garb was more Middle Eastern. The thobe, the kufi, the beard was, which is not as prevalent in the Ahmadiyya community. Very very westernized. Some people wear shalwar kameez, which is cultural to Pakistan. But I started to dress more Middle Eastern. I started to grow the beard. Um, uh, my ideas were becoming more radical. I believe that there should be that Sharia should be implemented, and strict rules and laws should be implemented over humanity. And so my theology was more radical than it was before.
How much dominant Salafi movement between Muslims in the United States?
I would say that they have a more dominant presence than any other school of thought. Whether it's the Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki, Sufi, or whatever else that's out there, the Salafi community is a very strong community, and it attracts a lot of people.
Did you see many conversions of Americans coming through to Ahmadiyya or to the Salafi movement?
I saw more American converts to the Salafi movement, definitely.
Did you see any convert to Ahmadiyya?
Yes.
Americans.
Yes. Yes.
And why you think the Americans are attracted to Ahmadiyya or to the Salafi movement? Can you give me like some reasons of depending on your experiences?
Well, I think the same reason when I went into the Sunni masjid, you hear this recitation of the Quran, you hear the adhan. In psychology, this is called what's known as the peripheral route to persuasion, which means that these incidental cues, a powerful sermon, a beauty from cultural aspects, that is appealing to certain people, especially when they've never heard or seen anything like it before. And so when you go in the presence of that, it brings about an interest, a mystique, if you will, something mystical about it. And that's what begins the process of, okay, let me look more into this. And I think that that's what it is. It's a cultural, people are interested in the cultural aspects of Islam, and they become attracted to it. And I think that's what it was partly for me, and it is for these individuals who are coming to the mosque for the first time and hearing something like the call to prayer.
So when you became a Salafi, did you study more of Islam? Did you like study the Quran more, the Hadith, the Seerah? What did you do during these years?
Oh, absolutely. When I became Salafi, I definitely started to learn more. And my primary goal and my primary studies were focused on inviting followers of the Ahmadiyya community to Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, because the Muslims consider the Ahmadis as non-Muslim. They consider them as kafir, as infidel. And so it was my goal to bring these people who I felt were being brainwashed by a cult, the Ahmadiyya community, and bring them back to what I now saw as a true Islam.
Correct them, like bring them to the right Islam.
Dawah. It's dawah, invitation, inviting them to the true Islam, because from my perspective, they were not Muslim.
Right. Did you succeed in bringing some of them?
I did a lot of debating, and I met people who left Ahmadiyya for Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and people reached out to me saying that, thank you for standing up. So I did witness. Usually it was through online conversations of people saying that, thank you for standing up. It's encouraged me to think otherwise now.
Did you receive anything from the Ahmadi people, like any threats, any insults, anything like that?
Not so much threats. They're a very peaceful community, the Ahmadiyya community is. So not so much threats, but in terms of boycotting me, not allowing me to go to the masjid because they thought that I might be trying to influence them in some way or another. That type of stuff definitely went on.
How did you start questioning the Salafi movement? What sparkled that?
It was a combination of two things. I started debating Christians in 2006, which happened because an Ahmadi friend of mine named Nabil had converted to Christianity. He was baptized. And I wanted to confront him on why he converted. And so that's when I started to debate Christians in 2006. And so when I started debating Christians, my premises, my beliefs about Islam were challenged in a way. and certain arguments were made that I wasn't completely familiar with. And so I was exposed to an alternative perspective to Islam more now than ever before. And so debating Christians was a part of it. And then my undergrad in psychology opened me up to my own behavior, as well as Muslim behavior and other types of behavior. And the combination of all of that kind of led me to the conclusion that Islam is not the ultimate reality behind our existence.
Wow. So what did you decide? What did you do? Did you take it like seriously? You stopped?
Mm-hmm. Well, in the beginning of undergrad, in the beginning of debating, I still had faith that Islam was true. I wanted Islam to be true. I really wanted Islam to be true because I had an emotional attachment to my identity as a Muslim. And I learned that through psychology later, that this is an emotional attachment to an identity, to a culture, to a tradition. And once I was able to see that, I still wanted Islam to be true. I still had those biases, as we would say in social psychology, or a cognitive dissonance where you have two conflicting beliefs simultaneously. And so I tried to seek out more liberal forms of Islam because I was Salafi, and everywhere I turned, Sunnism and traditionalism and some of the radical beliefs would still surface. You know, even if you interpret it a different way, there's still, for example, even the Sufis, you know, have to acknowledge that there are ahadith that talk about killing people for apostasy. They say that it's for treason, but they would implement these things in a Sharia society. And those were just, you know, some of the things that I was aware of that I really didn't believe in. I didn't think that a merciful God would want to treat his creatures this way.
What things were really the reason behind leaving Islam for real? Like, can you give me or point out some, highlight some things that were powerful reasons for leaving Islam?
Well, one of the most powerful reasons was the explicit tortures that were described in the Quran in terms of Jahannam, that your skin is going to be burned off and replaced with new skin, that you're going to be hooked with iron rods and dragged back into the boiling water when you try to escape, and that these type of explicit, grotesque tortures would occur for eternity in a very literal sense. And that was when I learned what human behavior was, I realized that a fallible, determined by so many different factors type of creature, the idea of being tortured was what was appalling to me. I think that there was other ways of justice that would be more appropriate, and torture is just not appropriate. And we were taught, you know, even in America, we were taught about cruel and unusual punishments and how we're trying to get away from that. And so that didn't resonate with me. So the doctrine of Jahannam in Islam was the primary reason that caused me to say, okay, you know what, I no longer, this is not what I believe.
But some people will interpret that as analogy, like it's not literal. It's just like it helps people to think about there is an eternal, whatever you will call it, like separation from the good God, like
I think Christians do that, not Muslims so much.
Okay.
If you look into the Ashari school of thought, you look into the Salafi school of thought, the classical orthodoxy within Islam interpreted as a literal endless torture. Even the Sufis, who you would consider as liberal as can be, their aqidah says that this is going to be a torture that never ends. There's no metaphorical interpretation of it within Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, not in the classical schools.
As I recall, the Ahmadi believe there is an end to. I'm not sure of it, but
what Ahmadis do, but not Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah.
So
why not go back to
Yes,
Ahmadiyya?
that's
well, then it would have to go back to Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, and if you can take him seriously or not. The thing is,
or at least take that doctrine from them and like probably will fit within.
But then I would be making my own Islam. And here's the thing, and what I was taught in Islam is that you are not to interpret the theology yourself. The scholars have spent years and years studying, so there should be a level of taqleed, The Salafis don't believe in taqleed. but they still believe that there should be an ijma amongst the scholars, and that's what the followers believe. And that's what it'd be inappropriate for the general Muslim, the lay Muslim, to interpret the theology himself. So I would be creating my own Islam. I would be inconsistent with 1400 years worth of theology.
So what this is first thing. Can you give me another thing?
Once that hit me, everything else was opened up for me, including the things that the Christians were talking about. Whether it was examples of like the satanic verses and how Muhammad dealt with that situation, or whether it was a person by the name of Abdullah Abisar, who, you know, left Islam.
Yeah, he was an apostate.
Yeah, he apostated Islam after he was able to change the Quran as he wanted to change it. All of these stories just started to make sense from a historical perspective. The conquests of Arabia, the companions of Prophet Muhammad couldn't get along. You had Ali versus Aisha, and these were supposed to be the icons of Islam, and this was supposed to be the best generations of Muslims. And you have all kinds of chaos that become apparent to you, whereas before you're ignoring them and justifying them because you're in love with your identity, you're in love with the ummah, you're in love with the culture. And so you justify and ignore all these things, interpret your way around these things, but when in reality you know that this is not something that should resonate.
So you kind of had a light that now everything looks clear, or clearer than before, at least. And you started doubting even. Did you doubt the person of Muhammad himself?
Well, yeah, this is
at the beginning,
a big part
like
of it.
You started questioning according to your background.
Well, I looked at him psychologically. I looked at him within a 7th century context. I looked at him within a possibility of having endured something like temporal lobe epilepsy, and which I think is beyond a possibility. I think it's plausible, more plausible than anything else. And so when I started to think about those factors, among many other factors, I think that he had influences like Waraqa bin Nawfal, among others, within history. The personhood of Muhammad started to make more sense to me too.
So you left Islam?
Yes, I'm done with Islam.
And did you tell people? Did you tell your family and your friends and like your colleagues in the mosque and everything?
Yeah, I told them.
What was the reaction?
It was, some of it was shock. Some of it was pain, a lot of pain. One of my best Muslim friends, I won't mention his name, deeply hurt by it. And because we did dawah together and we practiced together and we learned things together, and there was an emotional bond there. There was an emotional friendship there. And so those friendships are a little bit different now. You know what I mean? There are some relationships that no longer exist as a result of my apostasy.
How did your family take it? Like, it's one thing to go from one branch of Islam to another,
yeah.
and then living it for real. That's at least they had hope. Like when you're still like Salafi, you still believe in Muhammad and the Quran, the prayers and everything. You're just like, you have few differences, but now it's completely another.
Well, the two communities, the Ahmadi community and the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, don't get along. The Ahmadis are very much persecuted. So when I left Ahmadiyya for Ahl Sunnah, I left to the group that persecuted and kills Ahmadis in countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh. So I basically joined the enemy according to them. And so that was far more devastating, believe it or not, for them, for me to leave Ahmadiyya than it was.
This is news for me.
Than it was for me to leave Islam. Now, granted, my parents in that community, they say they absolutely love Muhammad and stuff like that. But I think that their attitudes are a lot different than most mainstream types of Muslims. So when I left Islam from them, a lot of them were like, "I told you so," in the sense that once you leave Ahmadiyya, you're bound to leave Islam because Islam is too radical. And so that's what they was like, it was an "I told you so" moment for them.
Yeah, you should have stayed.
Yeah, I should have stayed. I was brainwashed, and now I don't know what to do. I'm confused. But it was a liberation for me to leave Islam and its theological expectations in a lot of different ways.
Why?
There's a lot of different reasons. if I missed a prayer, for example, I no longer had that guilt that God is upset with me for missing a prayer. Or I didn't wake up in the morning for Fajr. You know what I mean? And those were paranoias that developed in my psyche, that God was upset at me because I'm not following the rituals right, or maybe my prayers aren't being accepted because I did something wrong, or because my aqidah isn't perfect. And these were paranoias that developed within my mind, that I'm completely liberated from now. I don't have to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to pray Fajr and think that God is mad at me anymore. It's a relief.
Well, some people will say it's just like laziness. You of course you want to be like free of anything. You're
Right.
not accounted to anything, and you just want to live your life. So many people want to do that, but God is not like that. You should follow some rules.
Well, I think that the discipline and structure was good, and I prayed every 5 times a day as much as I could, but there were times where I would miss prayer. You know what I mean? And I felt guilty because I wasn't following it to the T. You know what I mean? And then you read about that hadith, and the angels are going to come to you and ask you about salah, and so there was a paranoia there that I was liberated from, that that God, who wants me to follow specific rituals, and go to Mecca and make 7 circuits around the Kaaba, run between Safa and Marwa, go kiss the black stone and throw rocks at a devil statue, that this is what makes God happy with me. I no longer have to believe these things, and it's a liberation.
Why you didn't see this before? This is a question. You're a smart person. You have a good education. Why you didn't look at it this way? You were washing, doing the wudu, and you're thinking you can meet God because you just did like several washings of your hands and your face and etc. So why now you look at it from this view and you didn't before?
And that's the thing, Rashid. I did see these things. And my contention is that Muslims see these things too, as clear as day. They have an emotional attachment to their identity as a Muslim, and that emotional attachment is deep. That's why we have to approach them with love, so they can see what they already know. They see it too. I saw it too, but I would justify it. I would justify it and interpret my way to make Islam compatible with my reality. If I saw something like people thinking that rituals is how God is pleased with you, seeing that's just one example, especially in a foreign language, Fusa Arabi. I don't speak Fusa Arabi. Why should I have to speak to God in Fusa Arabi? That was another thing that I saw clear as day. And it didn't resonate with my being. It didn't make logical sense to me. And this was something that I saw, but I found a reason to interpret that away, because I was attached to my identity as a Muslim. And that's what I tell Muslims today too. You're in love with a culture that's beautiful, but in so many other ways it's detrimental to humanity.
Do you think this is why so many Muslims defend Islam to death? Not because they understand it, not because it's logical. I find so many people, they don't even know a little bit about Islam. They're ignorant, and they still defend it, and they will say it's not like that, and I know it's true, and etc. Do you think that's why they defend it?
Absolutely. Once you develop an emotional attachment to an identity, it could be anything, any group, any culture, any country, any flag, and you grow up in that. Think about it. You go to the masjid and you see your parents crying before Allah, and you get to know all these people in the community, and everybody's just inspired by the same thing. You feel that. You feel the happiness of your parents and these people that you grow up with in the masjid.
Right.
So there's an emotional attachment that develops there. And you want Islam to be true.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that it's true.
Right. Interesting. So now what do you believe?
Well, I believe in God, and I'm in search. That's where I'm at. I'm in search for God, and I'm constantly talking to people and praying to God to guide me in whatever direction that He wills.
So you believe in the existence of
Yes, I definitely believe in the existence of a supreme being.
And did you consider Christianity as one of the alternatives?
That's something that I will always consider until the day that I die. I have to be open to the possibilities, because if I shut anything out, then I might be depriving myself of the truth.
Wow. Do you consider probably you are wrong? You can go back to Islam, or you can like correct yourself, or you missed something you didn't see. Probably you were wrong in your ideas, your findings.
I mean, that's always a possibility that I'm wrong. You know what I mean? That's always a possibility. You have to be open to the possibility that I'm wrong. But I'm pretty sure that after being liberated from Islam, I'm pretty sure that it's not the ultimate reality behind our existence. From studying it, from looking at it, from studying psychology, from studying the theological arguments for and against it, I don't think that there's any objective evidence for Islam. There's none. I just don't see any. What are some of the arguments that they make? That the Quran is a miracle. These are arguments that simply are not objective. And we could get into that. And I just don't see any evidence for Islam, and I don't see the necessity for it. I don't think that God wants us to do a bunch of rituals. I think God wants us to have a relationship with him.
Your view is very close to Christianity, by the way, and I think you are influenced, you know it or not, by a Christian worldview, because that's how we see God. We should have a personal relationship with him instead of just giving him some, like bowing down and like 5 times and bye-bye, do your duty and you're done. But let me ask you this question. I studied many religions. And this is my belief as a former Muslim. Islam is a danger to humanity because of what we see. And it's not separated from Islam. It has a doctrinal root.
It does.
So what your thoughts about that?
Absolutely. I think that when you get deep down into what Islam is, it absolutely involves and includes politics and government. You can't separate the mosque and the state. And so if Muslims have the opportunity to, they will implement Sharia. And that will become a very dangerous situation for people who don't want to be Muslim.
From what way? Like how?
Well, even currently you see in the world, Christians and other forms of non-Muslims, Ahmadis, Baha'is, people of other religious traditions, they are persecuted. In an Islamic state, they wouldn't be allowed to preach their religion or discuss their religion or evangelize or propagate their religion. You have to be quiet. You can't express yourself. So there's strict rules and regulations in terms of Islam is the only way. This is the only religion that's allowed to be preached and propagated in this society. And if you're non-Muslim, you have to be quiet. The dhimmi, the one who is a non-Muslim, is literally a second class, if I wouldn't even put it second, it's like a 5th class citizen in an Islamic state. The liberties and the freedoms that we enjoy in this country, you can disagree with any foreign policies or domestic policies you want with the United States of America. You can even talk about some of the mistakes that we've made as a country. But the liberties and the freedoms that we enjoy in the United States that allow us to express ourselves would not be there in an Islamic state. I don't care how liberal your theology is. Hands down, the Sharia does not allow it. That's how it would be, and that's a danger.
And how about women? And you talked about minorities. How about freedom of speech and women?
I mean, that would absolutely be another major issue. I think with the Salafis, easily, with the organization at Hizb ut-Tahrir that wants to implement Sharia and create a global caliphate, definitely women would be treated as inferior. You wouldn't be allowed to go out in the streets except with a guardian. In Afghanistan, you see examples of women having to wear burqas and getting hit with sticks if they're inappropriate in any way. So you see 2 radical schools of thought within Islam, and they would have to battle it out between themselves over what version of Sharia would get implemented. But I think regardless of what version is implemented, women would be a lot more limited in the roles that they could play in society.
Do you think Americans should be aware of this danger, or should they just like accept Islam as one of the religions that exist here in this country?
Now, I don't believe in multiculturalism. I think that there are better ways to handle policies. There's ways to be humane, and there's ways to be inhumane. And in Islamic society, that there's a lot of inhumane actions that go on, and people should be aware of how people are being persecuted and treated in the world. And we should work on making this world a better place.
Should we stop Islam from spreading in the United States?
I think that should be a goal that we should have.
Will not that be like, I mean, against freedom of religion?
No, they can believe whatever they want. I think that we need to approach Islam intellectually. We need to tell them how Islam is dangerous and why Islam is wrong. Those are two important topics that we need to tackle with Muslims. And I think that if we tackle how Islam is dangerous and why Islam is wrong intellectually, then we can reach the hearts and minds of Muslims.
I discussed this issue with Americans, and they believe it's not a priority. Do you agree?
I think for the growth of human civilization, it is a priority. I think that Islam could be a hindrance to our collective growth, or is a hindrance to our collective growth.
How?
Because the longer Muslims are trying to convert and propagate and establish an Islamic state as they want to establish an Islamic state, the harder it's going to be for us to grow. Not only are we going to be stagnant, but we're actually going to go backwards. And there are certain Islamic organizations that want to turn the world into 7th century Arabia. That's not growing. That's going backwards. Whipping people for adultery is not what we need to regress to. We understand human behavior. We need to grow in terms of what we know today, in terms of science, in terms of the philosophical implications of what we know. We need to take those things into consideration and grow from that point and not go backwards into a 7th century worldview.
Do you have hope that people like you will leave Islam and will try to change what's happening, like you, me, and many others? Do you have hope from this view?
I do. In the 90s, Islam was the fastest growing religion in the world. That's what they would say. Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world. I think more people today are leaving Islam than ever before in history. More people are leaving Islam in the Middle East, in Pakistan, and in America than ever before in history. I meet people all the time on the campuses and in the communities who say, "Oh, I don't practice Islam. I'm not Muslim. I'm just American," or "I'm Christian now," or something along those lines. Growing up, I didn't see that.
Why you think this is happening?
I think people are becoming more educated. I think people are getting more exposed to truths that they were not exposed to before. The internet is huge in terms of spreading information. People have more easier access to the sources themselves and are educating themselves on why and how Islam is dangerous and not true. And that knowledge is being spread in Iran, in Pakistan, in Saudi Arabia, and you have people who might not be confident, but they're leaving Islam, and they're doing it in big numbers. And so I definitely have hope that this is going to continue.
So if a Muslim is watching right now, and I see so many Muslims are open-minded, they're not really, they're still Muslims, but they are open-minded. What a message can you give them in this interview?
If they're truly open-minded, think about what if Islam is not the ultimate reality. What if it's not? Just if you're really open-minded, open your mind to that possibility. What does the world look like? What if God doesn't want to implement these Sharia laws? What if God isn't upset at you because you're not following a set of rituals day in and day out? What if there's an alternative way? Think about that possibility. Open your mind out, and not just your mind, open your heart and your being out to that possibility. What does life look like now? That would be the message.
Another message for Americans who are attracted to the culture aspect, and then they like it, and they like rules, discipline, go to the mosque, like, and do you have any advice to them?
By definition, social psychology calls this the peripheral route to persuasion. Be aware of that you're being influenced by these factors. These factors does not make Islam true. Okay, that's what we have to realize. Because the imam gives an awesome sermon, or that the recitation is beautiful, or you like the food, or the people are really nice to you at the Muslim community center, does not make Islam true. And you need to learn what the religion teaches.
What they should do to learn that?
They need to consider sources in and out of Islam. Consider what the scholarly individuals are saying about what the religion teaches. Learn the controversies. Learn what the arguments are. What objective evidence is there for Islam? And I mean, that's where it begins, is educating yourself rather than going according to your emotions, because we know that that going completely according to emotions is a logical fallacy in of itself.
Thank you, Brother Farhan.
All right, thank you so much, Rashid.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it too.